Despite being one of the more well-known clone units among fans of the Clone Wars era, the 41st Elite Corps is often poorly understood. Those who are familiar with the Corps would likely remember it for the green markings its troopers wore on their armor, and for their friendliness with non-human allies of the Republic. But none of that is entirely true. Most of the 41st actually weren't all that keen on aliens. They painted their standard armor with grey stripes for half of the war, and they weren't even a real Corps. Evidently, there's much more to this unit than most fans know, so in this video, we'll be doing a deep dive into what the 41st was actually like.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
Despite its name, the 41st Elite Corps was actually a brigade, also known as a legion, composed of 4 regiments for a total of 9,216 clone troopers. Why it was named a corps when it wasn't is beyond us. The 41st was a component unit of the larger 9th Assault Corps, itself a part of the 3rd Sector Army. The 9th Assault Corps itself was legendary, known as one of the most effective units in Steel Blade Command, with many of the 9th Assault Corps' component units specializing in the application of overwhelming force. The 41st Elite Corps, though, was a bit more subtle. There were a bunch of noteworthy subunits within the 41st Elite itself. 2 of its more notable battalions were Sarlacc Battalions A and B, which seemed to be standard ground assault units, while in canon there was also the 41st Scout Battalion, a unit of clone scout troopers which in turn contained Red Company and the 41st Ranger Platoon. There was also Green Company, which appeared in Star Wars The Clone Wars, another standard unit whose members painted their armor with, you guessed it, green stripes. All of the clones within the 41st were considered elite in some fashion, either due to above average simulation scores on Camino or specialized training. Many clones in the 41st were ARF troopers, clone scout troopers, or sharpshooters, and as such, they employed specialized armor similar to that of Imperial scout troopers, which provided added mobility and featured additional sensors built into their helmet. While on worlds like Kashyyyk, ordinary members of the 41st Elite sometimes wore scout trooper armor, which was often painted with camouflage. When they weren't wearing camouflage armor, most members of the 41st Elite Corps wore armor with light grey stripes, as can be seen on Coruscant in Revenge of the Sith. There were exceptions to this rule, however, as some companies chose to paint their armor with green stripes, most notably Green Company. The 41st Elite Corps also had a pretty impressive arsenal of armored vehicles. For recon purposes and combat in densely forested regions, they made use of bark speeders, ISPs, and ATRTs, typically piloted by specialized bark troopers and ATRT drivers. For open warfare, they preferred AT-APs, AT-TEs, and HAV-W A6 Juggernauts, 3 heavy vehicles with exceptional forward firepower, suggesting that the 41st was much more aggressive on open battlefields than it usually was. Typically, they would use their AT-APs for long-range artillery fire and their Juggernauts as their main heavy tanks, as exemplified by the Battle of Kashyyyk, where they used such tactics to defend Kachiro Beach. The 41st Elite Corps was commanded by Senior Clone Commander CC-1004, who usually went by the name Gree. Other officers within the 41st included Green Leader, who was an officer within Green Company, and Commander Get, whom we'll talk about a bit more later. Commander Gree and the other clone officers within the 41st typically worked under Senior General Luminara Unduli, the Jedi General of the 3rd Sector Army, though they often worked with Grand Master Yoda. The 41st Elite Corps was regularly deployed on long missions to remote, undeveloped worlds, typically to work alongside or otherwise recruit non-human allies of the Republic. Like the 327th Star Corps, the 41st Elite gained a reputation for being good at protracted warfare in hostile environments, with their scout units being second to none in the entire Grand Army of the Republic. But they were best known for their other speciality. They were good at motivating the alien populations of those worlds to fight for the Republic. During the early stages of the Clone Wars, the Grand Army of the Republic was stretched thin across the galaxy, and to compensate for their manpower shortage, Republic strategists came up with the militia model. The concept was simple. Instead of deploying whole clone armies to defend far-flung Republic member worlds, a small company of clones would be sent in to train and arm loyalist militias and let them do the bulk of the fighting. This strategy worked fairly well for the Republic, with notable instances of it including the Battle of Harun Kal and the Battle of Giju. The 41st Elite Corps specialized in the militia model. This was in no small part thanks to Commander Gree, who was a xenoanthropology nerd and loved learning about obscure alien languages and cultures. This allowed the 41st Elite to make contact with the indigenous populations of strategically important worlds and convince them to fight for the Republic. Often, the 41st made loyalist armies out of pre-agricultural populations the separatists had written off as inconsequential primitives, training them in conventional tactics and arming them with advanced weaponry. The 41st didn't just work with alien populations that were already loyalist either. Oftentimes, they swayed neutral populations to the Republic's side, and sometimes they did so on separatist-dominated worlds. That was the other side of the militia model. It wasn't just used to defend loyalist worlds from separatist incursions. The 41st's job description included counterinsurgency and regime change, the latter of which is a particularly unethical thing, especially considering the nature of the Clone Wars. Over the course of the Clone Wars, the 41st Elite Corps saw a great many battles. During the early war, Green Company captured Nute Gunray on Rhodia and unsuccessfully attempted to defend the Star Destroyer Tranquility against the Sarge Ventress's subsequent rescue attempt. The battle on the Tranquility inflicted substantial casualties on Green Company, but the unit recovered enough to participate in the Second Battle of Geonosis a few months later. On Geonosis, Green Company assisted the 501st Legion in the assault on Poggle the Lesser's droid factory, filling in for the depleted 212th Attack Battalion. Once the droid factory was destroyed, Green Company and the rest of the 41st participated in mop-up efforts across Geonosis. Other notable engagements included the Battle of Dinlo, which didn't go nearly as well as Geonosis, and the Battle of Kashyyyk, the 41st's most well-known outing. On Kashyyyk, the 41st worked with the native Wookiees and Grandmaster Yoda to defend the city of Kachiro from the armies of General Grievous. They were successful, but during the battle, Order 66 was issued. Commander Faye of another unit executed General Unduli, while Commander Gree died trying to execute Yoda himself. Yoda escaped Kashyyyk not long before the 41st turned around and occupied Kashyyyk in the name of the newly declared Galactic Empire. After the rise of the Empire, the 41st Elite Corps was renamed to the 41st Stormtrooper Legion, and they went from working alongside alien species on the Republic's fringe to violently suppressing them. But this was less of a heel turn than it was a mask-off moment for the 41st Elite. You see, for all they worked with no human species, the 41st Elite weren't exactly the most enlightened men in the galaxy. Even Commander Gree, despite being an alien enthusiast, seemed to have looked down on non-human species. According to Commander Gett, just before the Battle of Kashyyyk, Gree described the Wookiees to the men of the 501st as a race of savages surrounded by slavers and worse monsters, yet tamed by the influence of civilization. This abominable rhetoric paints a more accurate picture of the 41st. They weren't friends of the Republic's loyal allies, but supremacists who looked down on the very peoples they were recruiting to fight the Confederacy. Gett himself was a fan of the writings of a certain Moff Tarkin, a brutal humanocentrist, and he cited Commander Gree as the one who introduced him to Tarkin's work. The 41st saw the species they were recruiting through a disgustingly colonial lens, viewing the alien species of the galaxy as wayward primitives who needed the guidance and rule of the Republic. It's abhorrent in the highest degree, and it shows that even before the end of the Clone Wars, the Republic was fast becoming an empire. So that's the real story of the 41st Elite Corps, or 41st Stormtrooper Legion, to be more accurate in more ways than one. But what do you think? Did you know this about the 41st? What are your thoughts? Let us know all that and more in the comment section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.